Cameo Radio.
Welcome to this episode of New Renaissance on Cameo Radio. I'm here with Danny Honeywine.
Hi.
And what do you think, Danny? This is definitely a New Renaissance episode, isn't it?
It's been quite the morning getting to this episode.
Oh, yeah. It's a thing. But today's episode, traps, attacks, and time mobs.
Oh, and more.
Oh, and more. Because you can't not deal with it.
Well, if you're going to take steps in your life to look beyond the veil, or if you're going to accept that calling,
The calling, the call to
you're
action.
going to accept the call to do that. There's a lot
There's really a lot.
to look out for.
Yeah. And that was all in episode 18, Peering Through the Veil. We talked about the processes of awakening. In this episode, we go into some of the traps, attacks, rabbit holes, the allies, and the things that take you away from your path in life, and the things that help you find your path.
And why we have to get into this stuff is because if we just talk about awakening, it's meaningless.
Getting woke.
Get woke.
Get
wake,
woke.
Wake up. And like people want to go around and like, I gotta wake my friend. Like it's all meaningless because it's to the individual.
Well, yeah, what are you trying to do? Change people? Can't change people. These are like the battles within. Right? That was a good coffee shop talk episode too.
Yeah.
Oh, man, so the traps of peering through the veil, because when you peer into something, right, you've got to go into it inevitably.
Yeah. Well, it's like it's imaginative, right?
Yeah.
It's like from the ether, from your imagination, from this other world. It's from somewhere else.
Well, pretty much.
Yeah.
The blue sky.
The blue sky thinking.
Right? So we're going to look into attacks, time mobs, the rabbit holes, the escapism, the cognitive dissonance that can mess this whole thing up for people.
Yeah.
Because these are the traps, attacks, and time mobs that come to get us. I really like the concept of time mobs.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, but
That's a
so the point of these things though is these are things that will stop you from bringing it back and embodying it in the world and then doing it. So if you have a great idea or even just something small, like say it was like a business idea,
like really any idea,
like really
any concept,
anything,
something out of the blue sky.
yeah, anything.
Right? Yeah.
What are the things that would stop you from then being able to bring that here and do that in the real world?
Right.
And I think that's what we're talking about today.
Really.
So what are the things that will keep you from actually embodying that reality that you see, that you've peered beyond the veil? Maybe it's just a simple idea.
It could be anything.
But really, I think in this time and the age that we're living, the ability for people to have massive revelations is like, it's right there if you want
it's
it.
huge.
If you want it, you just have to do it.
It's absolutely huge.
Yeah.
And it happens all the time.
And then what do you do with that? You know, do you fall into these traps that we're going to talk about? Or do you actually bring it back and make good works in the world? That's
right. You've got to make good works. And like you said, what a journey getting to this morning. And there's some stories in there because as far as anybody's concerned, you know, we're voices on a radio show, podcast, you know, maybe we've got it all together. We're still people.
We're just people.
And we're actually going through the journey of this stuff.
Yeah.
When we talk about peering through the veil in episode 18, it's because that's something that went on in life.
Yes.
These are not fanciful notions. These are real events that have taught us. And so when we start talking about traps, attacks, and time mobs, like, Danny, we have to be careful what we talk about, eh? Because it happens.
It happens. Yeah.
It does. So we end up with some rabbit holes. And so what's a time mob? Let's talk a little bit about some of these things that you're opening with.
I think we start at the beginning with attacks. And that's typically how it starts.
It's very simple.
You start, you see some possibility and some new beginning or some
Anything.
brilliant, some stroke of brilliance.
Like a vision.
Yeah.
Right? A great vision for a business, a great vision, an
Life.
idea, anything. A concept for life, something to work towards.
Yeah. But in this context of the world that we're living in now, typically it's like really big and it's revelation for the world. That's what a lot of people are going through.
People are at a global level.
Right? We're all going to this global level. So when you have that and then you start embodying it in your life, the very first thing that happens
You deal with that battle within. But
is the attack.
yeah, you get attacked too.
Yeah.
Your friends can attack you. You can deal with all kinds of pitfalls, right? Social pressures, all these sorts of things. And you can literally find out that the attacks come in on levels that don't make any sense.
Yeah, and this one took me a little while to figure out this whole concept of like, I would be like, attacks. I'm like, I don't understand. And then it happened to me. And I realized how it worked more, so that I was like, it actually kind of it felt like an attack. So it's more like it feels like an attack because you're like, I didn't do anything wrong. I'm just living my full embodied life in who I am consciously, and I'm being attacked.
Right?
You feel like you're being attacked.
And it pops up, and some people chalk it up as like Murphy's Law.
Right.
Right? Why do these things keep going wrong? And it's like the world's pushing against you. And it can come back through friends. It can come back through circumstance. It can be a total stranger. It can be somebody who pops up and says just the wrong thing at the wrong time. It could throw you right off your game. And we'll get into some of the methods of working with that as we go into the episode a bit. But those attacks, you're right, they feel like an attack.
And that's why we've labeled it an attack. It's not actually, you're not actually being, it's an internal.
Well,
you feel attacked. You're like, whoa, I'm just doing what has been revealed to me. This has been revealed to me, and I'm doing this.
Some of it can be attacks. Like I literally had rifles pointed at me.
Oh yeah, that's the physical manifestation.
That's the physical manifestation, because I was dealing with the bureaucracy and complaining about a corrupt judge and all this sort of stuff.
Yes.
And they literally, well, long story short, I've been exonerated.
Yeah.
I did nothing wrong.
I think, and it is more common for men to get the physical
attack.
More common, like for women to feel the emotional attack.
And both
the
are very
closest
valid.
people to me, are attacking me.
Absolutely.
So,
and sometimes that can. Let's get on to the other one. Time mobs.
Well, it leads to that.
It can. So
you're
being
being
time mob.
so
I got time mobbed for a year.
Exactly. Well, because you're feeling this attack, or you're being physically attacked, and so you go into that to deal with it. And where do you end up? In a time mob, typically.
Time mob. It can lead a rabbit hole. It can be a time mob.
I think even more than that. Literally, the bureaucracy could be a time mob.
Oh, waiting on hold.
Waiting for stuff.
Oh, remember, we've both dealt with the ombudsman.
Oh, we've both dealt with the BC Ombudsman's Office.
Ombudsman. Yeah. And so one of the things is they get you to
Ombudsperson,
do a whole bunch of
actually, sorry. It's Ombudsperson.
I think they now identify as yellow seedless bell pepper. I'm not sure.
Oh I would love to contact BC's Yellow Seedless Bell Pepper Complaints Office.
Right. Is it a he, she, him, her? I don't know. But so these things can turn into time mobs, because it's like, whoa, this is actually detracting from the substance of the issue. Why do you end up at the ombudsman in the first place? Because something went wrong. There was an administrative fairness issue somewhere.
You saw something happening, typically.
Yeah, it's not
Typically,
right.
you see something happening. You say, oh, I see this happening. And it matters in my heart. I'm going to pursue this issue.
Right, because I'm going to stand up for the right thing.
For the right thing. You get attacked a bit. Maybe there's some blowback. I had this blowback from the press once, and and I was like, no, I'm going to keep going.
Yeah. Somebody's like, you want to spend your time doing that? You're on your own.
Yeah.
I'm like, man, that feels like an attack.
Yeah.
That doesn't feel supportive.
So I ended up at the ombudsperson's office dealing with that. And that was a time mob. It was 9 months.
Yeah, it takes 9 months. And at the end of it, they might issue a recommendation to some other body, and there's no discipline, and the same problems just keep persisting.
Yeah.
So those turn into time mobs, because it's like, where are you going to put your energy?
Yeah, exactly.
And when you put your energy into something that's a dead end, well, that was a time mob. And so, yeah, you want to stay away from time mobs. You want to stay away from rabbit holes. Rabbit holes, I think, are a great one. They turn into like, I'm going to chase something.
Yes.
And it's bottomless.
Yeah.
That's another form of a time mob, but there's a lot of education that happens along the way in any experience. You know, I think that's one good thing to say. Time mobs or whatever. How else do we learn about this stuff?
Well,
right?
I think typically what will happen is like on some process or whatever you're dealing with, it's like, okay, well, like now I've been attacked, I've gone through this time mob, and you just kind of going like, what is going on? And so you dig into it.
And that's the rabbit hole.
Right? And you dig and you've got to dig and you're like, I got to get to the bottom of this.
What's really going on here?
Get to the bottom and you dig up and then you're like, holy, look at all this, what I'm digging up.
Yeah, and it's fascinating stuff.
And then all of a sudden you're like,
is there a bottom here?
I'm pretty sure
I think I hit a wall.
I think I'm at the bottom of this.
Yeah.
Like, okay. And then I think the trap in this one is like, I don't think it's wrong to go down a rabbit hole, but the trap is to be like, all right, I'm at the bottom.
Yeah.
Okay. You got to get out of there now.
Yeah. You got to dig your way out of it sometimes.
Because I think, well, I've experienced this with some people I thought were allies. They go down a rabbit hole and then they're like, hey, come in here with me.
Pull other people in.
Come in here with me.
Get time mobbed.
And I'm like, okay, well, what did you learn while you were down there? Just tell me. And they're like, no, you got to get in here in the bot. And I'm like, I don't need to go down that's your rabbit hole to go into. And I'm happy that you went down there and I'm glad you reached the bottom. Could you please, do you want a rope? Could you tell me so that you could come up and tell me what you learned?
Can you throw me a lifeline here? And I think that's something you mentioned earlier too, that when you go on these heroes' journeys, that really you want to come back. You want to bring something back with you. So you don't want to get stuck at the bottom of a rabbit hole. You don't want to be endlessly time mobbed because then people are like, hey, haven't seen you in like 15 freaking years.
Right.
Where you been?
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't accomplish anything in their life because they're too busy spinning in a circle, right? The hamster wheel. Yeah. That's another big part of it.
That's why we're even having this episode.
Right. And a lot of people, so they peer through the veil, they get a little glimpse, they know something's right. So they push against some injustice in the world, or they try to do something, they get attacked for it, they get time mobbed about it. There's all this red tape, bureaucratic BS, all this sort of stuff. And often it will lead people to feeling so discouraged that instead of continuing to try to address the real issue that led them on the first thing, they start to practice an escapism. And the escapism can come in many forms. There's all kinds of coping mechanisms. Some people fall into addiction, substance abuse, alcoholism.
That's a big one, yeah.
Huge one.
Yeah.
Some people are like cutters, right? There's all kinds of outlets. Some people get addicted to anything that they can get their hands on.
Anything that you can name that could be addictive. I mean, that could be.
And it absolutely pulls them into something, right? So like some people get really concerned about their addictions. And then that turns into a time mob itself. And what did I say? Like, I'm like, have a drink. You know, have a smoke, do whatever you need to do. Don't let those things go into excess because those themselves turn into rabbit holes, time mobs. You're attacking your own body.
Well, you've escaped. Yeah, it now
turns into
using.
Out of control. You're a user, right?
Using it.
There's escapism. And then there's other things too, like we'll get into that a bit more, but like spiritual bypassing and some of this can be That's another form of escapism.
Yeah.
Or just running, the fight or flight mechanism. I'm not going to deal with this. I'm going to combat it. No. You have to meet it with a heartfelt, empathic interpretation, not combat or run. And that really is the evolution. I firmly believe.
I believe it 100%. Seen it in my own life. So
heartfelt, empathic interpretation of events instead of the like reactive nature to fight it or run from it.
Yeah.
And that's very, very difficult. But I think that's part of getting into solutions, right?
Well, yeah, that's the cognitive dissonance that I'm gonna.
Oh, which one are we gonna do? With both things being equally true,
Are we gonna fight it or are we gonna fight it? Flight it or fight it? Flight it or fight it? And it's like, no. We can't do that anymore.
No.
And the time has come and gone. We are starting over. We have to do this.
Oh, it's so intense.
Yeah, on a global level.
Right? And the cognitive dissonance, I think one of the things that I've seen in there is that people will go off and glom onto a singular topic and say, okay, I'm just going to say that I'm a card-carrying liberal now.
Right.
Or whatever. I'm going to say
I'm going to vote for Paul Poilievre or whatever.
Paul Poilievre. I think Trump 2020 or Trump is evil. And the fact is, none of you know Trump. None of you know Poilievre. Poilievre?
I freaking have no idea.
Whoever that actor is.
Yeah.
Nobody knows these people.
Yeah.
And some people, CNN, CTV, ABC, CBC, I'm a Dodge guy. I don't like Fords, right? It turns into this thing and it's like, hey, both are true.
Yeah.
They all have merit.
Yeah.
Right? And so people become incredibly polarized in this. And I think that's, I mean, I don't know.
I think
like Jordan Peterson could probably fill us in.
And I mean,
but-
my whole thing with the past couple years with the polarization is that I see that as a manifestation of the polarization of the narrative.
Oh, it is. And it happens in
And
people.
we've kind of talked about that on previous episodes where it is literally two narratives. And so that's creating two narratives will polarize people, but it's both.
It's both.
And it's none.
They both have merits. Yeah,
Right?
it literally is more so both and none.
Right.
It's not just one or just the other. No. Black couldn't exist without white. It is in contrast that we find definition. Right? It's very, very important. So one of the things in that finding definition is you have to become the cartographer of your own life's uncharted territory, which is like nobody's going to teach you to do that. And we might find a guru, you know, when the student is ready, the master will appear. We talked about some of that in the previous episode. But that is a very difficult one because it takes very keen observation. It takes some modality as well, some kind of a guidance system. People have to fundamentally be able to listen to that little voice in themselves.
Yeah.
And they have to be able to check that voice too and say, are you the right voice? Are you, and I don't mean like actually hearing voices in your head, but like your moral center, your compass, your point of bearing and reference. You know, we were talking about that earlier today and saying maybe that's your baseline that you come from. And I'm like, this kind of like a clinician sets a baseline.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's a real thing that everybody's born with, and then it either carries on or it's like suppressed, but it's always quiet.
It's always quiet.
Because
yes, it's not loud.
No, I mean, and literally in my life, I experienced a point where I had this loud voice that was like telling, you know, like it was like the narrative, right? It was like in my head, and it was
just do it this way.
Do this or do that.
That's kind of the attack. That's the
and it was
battle.
just in my head. And my dad always told me, like, if you can in your life, try to listen to the little voice. And so then I was always aware of like these two voices. And so if I had a thing in my head that was like doing this or whatever, I would be like, oh, but like the little voice, like remember that it exists. And so even if I couldn't act on it in whatever situation I was, at least I knew it existed and I was aware of it. And so like it was there, it existed. And then in certain times when I could act on it or when I could do something, I did. And then eventually that narrative voice just went away.
Right. You checked it.
Oh, it just disappeared. Yeah. Just over
overrode.
with the work and that I had done and just becoming cognizant of that. It just went away. All of a sudden I was like, wait a minute.
Well, good ideas don't require force.
No, exactly. Yeah.
And if something's flimsy, it'll fall apart.
I credit the loud voice that I had very much. I credit it to later education and university.
Oh, yes. The narrative, like you
They were
said.
very difficult. And it
yeah.
It was, yeah.
Oh, that's the thing. And those things are very reinforcing. They condition people to perpetuate those institutions.
Well, because it was unnatural. We actually had talked about that this morning. Like if you were if you wanted to become an engineer, process engineer, right?
Yeah, I was going to get into engineering.
Yeah, become a welder, and then what's the path after? Okay, so you've done the work. You kind of know what it is.
Worked in the
Do you want to
field.
continue to do the work? Do you want to do the design work, or do you want to do the oversight work of all of that? Right? It's like very simple. That's a very simple model. If humanity had that, would go a long ways.
Right,
in
but
society.
instead people would get into engineering from a pure kind of academic base, and they would produce stuff that we'd get in the field, and we go, can't even build this.
Exactly.
So we'd re-engineer it, and we'd tell them afterwards, and they'd come and be like, oh, wow, this is brilliant.
Yeah.
But if I had taken that level of understanding and then gotten in as, you know, a junior or something in a firm, they're like, well, you're not a partner, you don't get a say. And I'm like, no, but I'm the guy that used to change your engineer drawings into a spool sheet, and we'd actually build it and it would actually work. So whatever, but I have to deal with that. And that's the same reason why we see big, huge things that are run in the government that fail all the time.
They don't work.
Because these people come out of university, they have no practical experience.
And there's no heart, because there's no heart's path in it. It's like,
And there's no heart's
it's
path.
like, why would you go and do a thing? It's like, well, because I feel compelled to go and do that. Why would you become a welder? Like, well, I feel compelled to become a welder because I think I might want to be an engineer.
Right.
Like, that's like actually like
That's a good question.
natural, logical procession into that.
Yeah, well, it was leading in that direction, you know. And I didn't end up, if you follow welding all the way through, at the time anyway, you become a mechanical engineer.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm like, that makes sense, you know, and that's not bad. And I ended up doing architectural and mechanical drafting and design. So I'm like, I didn't end up too far off.
No,
but I certainly.
But our institutions are not set up that way.
No.
And so I ended up in the institutional path where I ended up in a university being trained in whatever. I was being trained. I don't even know what I was being trained in.
What were they training you to do?
It's like natural resource conservation. And then what was the end of that? Well, I did tree planting and then I ended up in the government. And it was like, okay, but this isn't functional.
Right.
This isn't oversight. There isn't any
doesn't actually work.
Anything in here. And so I ended up leaving because I was causing more harm. I felt like I was causing more harm being in there than being out of there. So I just left. Wow. Yeah. Right. So I had more of the like institutionalized path.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And I went the other way. I was more into the trades. Well, that's fascinating. And that's turning those clues into confirmations. And if we can learn from those things, we avoid the pitfalls, and we can get around the second guessing. Because what was the thing I was saying this morning too? I was like, I could just go back and get a job. I could go and start another company. But every time I do that in Canada, it gets sacked. Right. It's like the system's set up to fail us. And so every time we keep trying to use a system that fails us, we're failing ourselves. So people get on these journeys, they peer through the veil, they start to learn these things, they move forward and they encounter these pitfalls and these traps, right? So we have to learn from that and we have to mind it, right? We have to look at these clues, and we can't, some of those journeys are more internal, and we can't start spiritually bypassing stuff and get into escapism. You know, I'm just going to feel good. I'm just going to do the thing that makes me feel good. And they're going to put the blinders on and people start ignoring stuff. They turn their backs on their friends and family. They seem like they're fine. And people who are a little more fringy kind of go to them and they're like, hey, check it out. Like, I love you. Like, check out this thing that I'm working on. And those people, they've got their blinders on. It challenges their worldview. They say, no, thanks. And they bypass it, right? And so that spiritual bypassing or that escapism or those blinders.
Well, and really, I mean, I have a lot of compassion when I see that, and I see people going through it a lot, and I'm always like, I'm here for you when you're ready to come down from there, because there's something to bring back, and it's really great, and I'm excited for you to bring it back, but I really hope you come back.
Right. Well, and a lot of times those people who do that end up being each other's jailers. Right. They seem like, they've achieved a higher spot somehow, but they're kind of stuck there.
They feel like it or something.
Feel like it. They act like it. Yeah. But they actually perpetuate some of the issues. They can perpetuate those pitfalls, and they can process a lot of frivolity.
I think that's a big thing currently I sort of like if I see like women's, just like what's happening in like with women generally right now. There's a lot of that. And I kind of relate to it because I'm like, well, the world is really, if you actually look at it, it's like very scary. Like what is actually happening? Like we're talking about genetic engineering of humans.
Oh, child trafficking and Davos forums.
And just the corporatization and the conglomeration of everything. It's like, that's pretty scary.
Yeah, the attack on the food chain.
So I can kind of see how
global insurrections,
why that is happening. And it kind of like makes sense. But I'm also like,
hey, wake up.
What I'm not really sure. Right? I see a lot of it. Like
it's easy to shrink from that, right? Yeah. And that's where we start escapism.
Like if I could just make a lot of money, or if I could just manifest a lot of money, or if I could just do this thing.
Turn on the hamster wheel.
Yeah, it's like not
right. And that's what I mean about the frivolity.
Yeah.
The frivoiality.
Oh yeah, I had a woman. This is a good story. I was picking up something. I was dropping something off, and I was behind a lady in a store, and she was picking up a newspaper, and she wanted the flyers.
Oh, right.
She didn't want the newspaper. She wanted the the piece of the newspaper that's just filled with junk papers. She really wanted it. She was really trying to figure it. She liked that. And I said, I was like, oh, I might have something that you might enjoy reading.
Right. The Village Voice Gazette.
I was going to grab her the Village Voice Gazette. And then she said to me, no, it's just mind fodder, honey. She said, oh, honey, it's just mind fodder.
Right.
And I thought, how odd. I've never heard this term mind fodder, but fodder is like fallout from like nuclear war. I was like, oh wow, that's for the brain,
fodder.
like for the brain,
Cannon
for the
fodder.
mind. I couldn't figure it out. I was like,
Oh, just fodder, just shrapnel.
I don't want mind fodder. Thank you.
Shrapnel, debris, right? Just
the frivolity.
The frivolity. So she was on a frivolity path to try to get around it too. Like, I'm going to distract myself. I'm going to play some Tetris.
Meanwhile, she was probably 80. And I would like to sit down with you and have coffee and talk about your life.
Yeah, she probably got great stories.
Great stories. And I just thought,
she's valuable, more valuable than she gives herself credit for.
Probably.
So she's undermining her entire life's process.
Yeah. And like, where's the spaces for that, right? So like, who is going to, I can see it, but I'm like, do I have currently the capacity to see that vision of like, where's the space to have these people gathered?
Wow.
Telling stories.
And that's the thing. People have to trust in the process, right? That and get away from the frivolity and trust that they see something for a reason. They have to keep moving forward. Don't fall into the pitfalls. Don't become a victim to menticide, right? Don't have your mind destroyed so you're just looking for cannon fodder, getting high, getting drunk, doing nothing all day, playing premium gaming on Facebook or some silly thing like that, right? So we have to defeat our own mind virus in that process. And with that, there's the rules of wizardry. So these rules are something that I found me in an odd way a long time ago. And I think that they've been pretty helpful, especially while I was beginning my journey through this stuff. Should I read them out real quick?
Sure.
There's only 5 of them. But the first one's pretty important. So, given the proper motivation, almost anyone will believe almost anything. Most human beings are under the spell of social consciousness, which is mainly driven by fear and uncontrolled urges. Because of this, people believe lies because they are afraid it is true, or because they want to believe that it's true. Everyone's heads are full of knowledge, facts, and beliefs. Most of it is false, yet they think it all true. Most people only rarely tell the difference between a lie and the truth, yet they are confident that they can, and so are all the easier to fool. Being afraid something is true is accepting the possibility. Accepting the possibility is the first step to believing. To defend against this first rule, I must always be vigilant, knowing that I too am vulnerable, and never arrogantly believe that I am immune. I must always be alert that I can fall prey. And that's to that social consciousness of fear and uncontrolled urges. Second rule of wizardry. The greatest harm can result from the best intentions. It sounds a paradox, but kindness and good intentions can be an insidious path to destruction. Sometimes doing what may seem right is wrong and can cause harm. And boy, isn't that true. Good intentions, being kind, can encourage the lazy and motivate sound minds to become indolent. The more help you give, the more help a person will need. As long as your kindness is open-ended, they never gain discipline, dignity, or self-reliance. To counter to this is knowledge, transformed into wisdom, forethought, and understanding of the first rule. Even then, it's not always enough. Violation of this rule can cause anything from discomfort to disaster to death. And think what might happen if we had magic. Because magic's real, apparently. We keep learning this. So anyway, third rule, I like this one. Passion rules reason. Very, very simple. But if you're passionate and you have a belief structure behind something, it will rule and dominate your reason. And it's intense, and that's part of people's journey, right? They have a reason. Why phone the ombudsman? Well, passionate about it. Now you got a reason. So the fourth rule, there is magic in forgiveness. The ultimate aim in true magic is to create and heal. You're going to do something good. Right? There's not, some people talk about black magic and stuff, and I'm just like, that's not helpful.
It's not useful.
It's not useful. There's no good in that. Fifth rule of wizardry, and I think probably the most important rule of wizardry, mind what people do, not what they say, for deeds will betray a lie. I love it because it's true. If somebody says one thing and then does another, what the hell's really going on here? So these are the rules of wizardry, and I quite enjoy them. But I think that they're called this because a lot of times when people are peering through the veil or starting on a journey, they feel like it's magic. There's something really miraculous happening, and it's unexplainable. And wizardry is like, well, if you want to be a whiz, yeah, it's not some doctrine.
No.
No. There's just some rules, and they help people to break the spell. That's the fun part about the rules of wizardry. Get that spell off of you, right? Because that leads to these pitfalls, time mobs, mind viruses, all this sort of stuff. Wow. And then and that can get pretty far out too.
Oh, yeah.
It can get really, really intense. And people end up on the most incredible journeys as long as they trust the process. It's really something. And you can't mess with the universe.
Right.
The universe will mess with you. You like, what's that saying? You want to make God laugh, make plans.
Right. Yeah.
Murphy's Law kicks in, these sorts of things. And it seems unexplainable. I think that's why they talk about magic. I have my own perceptions of magic. But, yeah. Do we want to go into that?
I think we'll save that for another episode.
I think that's a whole other episode.
Yeah.
So, we've looked at a whole bunch of the different challenges. We've looked at personal challenges, spiritual, perceptual growth issues, how to do what's never been done, becoming the cartographer of your own journey, being told or feeling that your heart's path is impossible, right? The attacks that can come against a person. People might say that your ideas are irrelevant, or they don't care, or they don't pay any attention, or they're just downright degrading or mean towards you. Right? Some people might refuse to accept the facts that you give them along the way because you've been down some of these rabbit holes. And you come back with stuff on your journey and you've got some great details and they go, nope, don't challenge my worldview. But you love them and you want to help them. Most often that's what it is. Or you just come out, some people get mad. That's another trap. That's another time. I'm getting mad. Look at this stuff. But everything still looks the same in the world. And it doesn't matter if it's falling apart because it still looks the same. And I can still go to the grocery store and the gas station's still open and the schools are still there and the hospital's still there. Even though we see it falling apart, people put the blinders on. So don't fall back into old patterns. Don't let those doubts throw you off. Those are huge challenges. And part of it too is, like you were saying, Danny, about being compassionate towards a lot of these people who we love, who sometimes we can't help them to get woke. Right?
Well, yeah, and there's no purpose in that.
No, and we don't want to spiritually bypass the process by going on an ego trip and saying we're woke.
Oh, I'm going to wake my friends.
Wake my friends up.
It's crazy, yeah. Sometimes
Sometimes we have to deal with grief and loss, not just around other people, but in our own lives, because our own lives can change so much in that process. And that is incredibly difficult. We have to learn to let go and move on in ourselves. And the reality around us doesn't actually change that much.
No, yeah, and it's you have to do it for yourself. You can't. Everybody has to do it for themselves.
Battle within.
Learned this the hard way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's not an easy journey at all. So one of the big saving graces in this whole thing is likely the willingness to grow through it. I think that's one of the things that has saved me along the way so much. I don't deny my experience. I say, yes, these things happened. Yes, they're not what I wanted, perhaps, or they are not explainable in a way that's rational to my mind. I've had to go through grief. I've had to go through loss. I've had to accept something that I can't control. I've had to accept things that are completely outside of my ability to understand. And I want to know. I want to understand. But that turns into a rabbit hole that I might not get out of. Right? So I have to be willing to continue to grow through it. I have to trust the process because honestly, sometimes there's just nothing you can do about it. It's terrible. But that brings me to stick-to-itiveness. With a little bit of intuition and some good guttural fortitude, we get some stick-to-itiveness. So don't give up when adapting. And don't give up because you're disappointed. You got to stick to your process. And you got to find support and help and be positive, There's a lot of negative stuff in the world, like you were saying. Yeah, there's a lot of negative stuff. And, one of the ones that I really like is J.P. Sears because he just makes fun of them all. It's great. You know, that's hilarious. And we're pretty good at that too.
Comedy. Yeah.
Comedy. George Carlin, all these guys, great stuff. And you know, that's it. Guttural fortitude. Knowing that you're building your path, knowing that you're walking your path, and having that shoulders back, head high, keep going, look death in the eye, know that it's an illusion, and break through those barriers in yourself.
Yeah, and then for women, I mean, I put this in here because it's not necessarily my experience at all. It's more of an embodiment and like a surrender into you are embodying and like being okay with it.
Yeah.
Just being okay with it.
Right.
And just trying to remember that like you're going to be okay.
You're going to be okay.
Like that's more I think my interpretation of it. Because I literally can't. I have done that guttural fortitude and building, and it doesn't work.
No, it's different for men and women.
It really
too.
doesn't work. Like, I mean, there's that in it, but if you just do that as a woman, it's like, well, you've lost. And that's the heroine's journey.
The heroine's journey.
And I have done that one, and I have come back, and I'm like, no, it's embodiment.
Well, and that's a great point to make too. That these things do work to a certain. You do have to. I think everybody. What do you think? When men and women have to have some stick-to-itiveness. You can't give up on ourselves.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, I think that's probably universal.
That's pretty universal.
That's life. I mean, because if any kind of a life form doesn't grow and continue, it's giving up, and that's death. And then we have manifestations of that in disease. It's a disease. It's a disease. You have a disease because there's some aspect that's not integrated.
It's not at ease.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the thing. Having that stick-to-itiveness, having that guttural fortitude, but also affording yourself the time to go through that grief process, whatever it might be, to accept something, right? And the difficult part, the thing that actually happens, like in the end of the rules of wizardry, the deeds will betray a lie. We have to do the hardest thing, which isn't just to change the way we think about something, but we have to change our patterns of behavior. And that is personal growth. That's very difficult. It's the hardest thing. Try changing your diet. Try quitting smoking. Try defeating your own shortcomings, your own weaker natures. It's very difficult. It's very, very difficult. But there's great reward in doing it as well, right? And I suppose that is then the embodiment of it to a degree.
The embodiment of it is it's real. Good or bad, like feel good or feel not good. That's embodiment.
Right. And we can't bypass that by just feeling
Exactly.
good.
If you want to feel good, that's the bypassing it. But the reality is that it's an embodiment. And if you're going to embody who you are and what you're doing, then you end up walking, and it's like fire.
It's like fire.
Really.
Yeah. And some people get addicted to, say, depression, not just feeling good, but the opposite as well, or whatever it is. And we have to find that way through that fire. It's a very difficult one. But then we learn how to live joyfully, even with the changes.
Let's play.
How do we get through that stuff? Yeah, we learn to play. We learn to have fun. We learn that that's where we grow. And it gets us back in touch with our inner child, I think, in a lot of ways. Because what are kids doing? They're growing. And all they do is play. Everything's a game.
Yeah, they're in it.
Everything's a game.
Yeah.
And sometimes parents get so frustrated at their kids because their kids playing a game. It's like, grow up, take it seriously, get a job.
It's a game.
Yeah, if you don't know what to do with your life, go join the military. It's like, whoa, man.
And why do we play?
Why do we play, Danny?
Test. We're testing things.
Yeah.
Testing.
We get better at stuff.
Testing. And then once you've played it out, you've played it out enough, then you can say, okay, this is how it's done.
I heard a good one. Why do kids play tag?
Why?
They're learning to hunt.
Exactly. That's what I mean. You're testing.
You're testing it.
You're testing this. You're testing this. You're building the skills. You're trying it out. And then eventually, you turn the switch on.
Absolutely.
And it goes.
Yeah, and it goes. We learn lessons along the way. And then we remember those lessons. And we take those cues and clues and all this sort of stuff. And then we can avoid the traps. We don't have to learn those lessons over and over again.
Yep.
How many rabbit holes do you think you've been down in your life?
Oh, lots.
God, me too. So many.
Tons.
Get out the tinfoil hat.
No, well, and it's not even that. I'm like, anytime I find a thing, anytime I've seen some a glimpse of some reality, and then I've gone into it to try to see what it really is. After the attacks and the time mobs, I end up in a rabbit hole, and I'm like, wow, I just discovered like this massive corruption in this particular organization because I had to go down the rabbit hole, and I'll go until I'm at the bottom. I found it.
Yeah, you got to find it.
Like, I'm like, this is it. And then I'll bring it back, and people are like, well, who cares? And I'm like, I just did all of that. And then you can get caught in the spiritual bypassing of it. And
right.
going
people trying to bring it back to somebody with their blinders. It doesn't matter.
I need a miracle. But anyways, yeah, that's right. What it is for me. It's like going and finding that. So, I mean, I think people do. I think that's where the conspiracy theorist or whatever. But like, sometimes there actually is a conspiracy.
Sometimes there is.
Well,
and that's the thing. Like my lawyer was saying the other day, this is just like Watergate.
You're like, oh, it's literally a conspiracy to convict a
innocent man. Yeah. It's like Watergate. And he says, it's not up to you to figure this out. It's up to the people involved to figure out not what's happening over there, but what's happening right in front of them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that once that Watergate goes.
Oh, yeah.
And like, we like literally, that's happening. That's happening. We are watching that happen in my own life. And that's a bit of a rabbit hole. And it can turn into a time mob. And, from my own personal experience, I would say that it takes away from my joy. And it has. And it's taken away from all kinds of things in my life that are very productive and feel good and do good things for the world and are not frivolous and have lasting meaning. And other people have come to me because they need some of that meaning too. And I'm like, hey, it's in you. And they've got empowerment. We empower other people by continuing that way.
Yeah. Well, you were just alerting people to the fact that they have power.
We're alerting them to the fact that
that's very.
you have power.
Empowerment is a little bit of that bypassing thing because it's like, oh, you want to be empowered? Come over here, and they're like, oh, empowered. And it's like, no.
It's a trap.
You literally have to just pull the rug out and be like, you have power. Figure it out, or like you don't.
You have power in yourself. We can only ever undermine ourselves.
Yeah.
But these things are traps along the way.
Yeah.
People poo-pooing your ideas and stuff. Don't let that. If you can stand up to the hardest attacks, the hardest assaults, or the most demeaning or belittling or degrading things.
And see the largest time mob.
Or see the biggest time mob.
Yeah.
Or the deepest rabbit hole.
Then you're like getting to the end of it. You're like, all right, I might actually come back with something.
Well, that's part of the hero's journey too, the monomyth.
Yeah, I might actually come back with something. If you didn't do any of those things, well, you're never going to. There's nothing to bring back, and there's nothing to...
Right. And as you're going down the rabbit hole, you have to remember what you're getting down there for so that you can bring it back.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it can just turn into a hamster wheel of a thing.
Oh,
why am I in here?
You'll end up at the bottom of some hole yelling at some people who are up above being like... They're like, do you want some help? And you're like, why am
I even here?
Listen, come down here. It's weird. Yeah, it's really quite something.
Oh, wow. That's really something.
Yeah.
Well, I think just to... kind of bring the whole concept back in, we've done a pretty good job. Because it's really something. Don't fall off your path. Don't let your friends fall off their paths. Encourage people.
Cheer leadership.
Let them know that the power is within them, and it's always been there. Absolutely. That's a very, very important thing. Don't give up on yourself. What was something I said earlier today, Danny? I said, I gave up on myself at points, and I didn't have any faith in myself, but I had faith in other people who had faith in me.
Right.
I didn't believe in me, but I believed that they did. Maybe they saw something that I didn't. And those are darker times, and we all go through it. Who hasn't?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, good God.
Yep.
So there's always light at the end of every tunnel. And we have these things. I've firmly come to believe that if you believe something, if you know something, if you got to figure it out, you're going to realize that either you've been lied to, and it's that social consciousness, it's that, you use the rules of wizardry to break that, crack out of that.
Yeah.
Realize that you believed a lie.
Right.
That's very hard. There's grief in that. Or you realize that what you're onto is true, and you start looking at those confirmations and those clues that led you into it, and you realize that it's true. You can't be too fanciful though, because you got to take the good and the bad.
Oh yeah, well otherwise you'll end up in you could miss the point where you realize it's a lie.
Exactly. How far into a lie does somebody go?
Right?
Is that a hamster wheel?
Well, that's cults.
Oh, it can be.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's
Brainwashing.
Very, very, very culty.
Right? People get fixed on a singular. They put blinders on. They don't want to know anything else. I found a comfortable spot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, is that a trap? Does somebody get stuck in a pitfall? Come into this illusion. It's so comfortable. You'll feel great. You'll never want out.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, is that it?
That's a cult.
Yeah. Is that alcohol? Is that alcoholism?
It's all of those things. Yeah, it's a trap.
It's a trap.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's fascinating. It's a cult. Yeah. And it could be a cult. Could be at your local pub.
Mm-hmm.
But it could also not be. I know some pubs that are great centers of culture and entertainment.
Oh yeah, I mean, cults can be culture can be right in the culture.
Right. There's no way to generally blanket statement anything.
No.
Because it's in the people.
Yeah, it's just in what's happening. Yeah.
It's in what's happening. Yeah. So
Heavy stuff.
it is. It's legit. So don't fall into it. It's definitely something that gets far too many people.
Yeah, keep going. Yeah, and like, don't be like, oh, I can't go down that rabbit hole. Don't be afraid of it. It's like, well, if you have to go in there, you have to go in there.
Yeah. Just be
like,
diligent.
make sure you have people to pull you out, or like, know why, why you're going down there. Like, yeah, don't get stuck down there. I've got some good friends or like allies, I would call them, that I'm like, you are so far in this rabbit hole that like, I don't even know what language you're speaking anymore.
Oh, sometimes it just gets ridiculous.
And then they're like belittling and badgering me, and I'm like, no, I told you I'm not coming down there.
They get on like a superiority complex almost.
It's odd. I'm like, I have no reason to go down there. Right. I want you to come back and share with me all of the stuff you've found, and then like, let's apply it in the world.
Absolutely.
It's really quite something.
Yeah. It really is quite something, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wow.
They'll come out.
Oh yeah, inevitably. I think everybody does. Well, thanks so much for listening. Check the comments below. It'll lead you to probably an article that has the rules of wizardry in it if you want to know more. Check the Village Voice for updates as well.
Yeah.
Love it that everybody's listening to Cameo Radio. Thanks for coming today, Danny.
An interesting episode of the New Renaissance.
Absolutely. So don't forget to stay tuned.
Get tuned.
Oh yeah, that's right.